Hello everyone, welcome back to another brand new Minikube YouTube series video. In today's video, I'll be talking about the load balancer. So in our previous video, we talked about node port type. In our second session, we talked about cluster IP, right? So mainly we are focusing on cluster IP, node port, and load balancer type. So we are talking about the Kubernetes service type, right? So in today's video, I'm going to first of all explain how this works actually when we use load balancer type, and after that we're going to talk about add-ons because this is a bit different compared to K3D. If you have seen my K3D videos where it was very straightforward, but in Minikube it does a bit differently. It's still straightforward, but I would say, but it is not as straightforward as K3D. And after that we're going to talk about tunnel. So without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, let's understand how this actually works. So I have a picture. This picture I copied from the internet. Disclaimer, it's not my own picture. We have the Minikube cluster you have already seen if you have seen my previous video, but it's for these people who did not see my videos. So we have one node which is control plane basically, and the other node, this is the name of the node, and this is basically the worker node. And in here, what we had a service node port. This is what I showed you in my previous video, but today we're gonna convert this one to load balancer type instead of node port, okay? And here I wanted to show you the IP. So the IP is assigned for this particular node is this one, and they are running actually on Docker, okay? So on top of that, one more thing I wanted to show you, so it's basically get pod, and here you can see one pod actually running on Minikube node, so it's basically this node, and the other pod actually running on this particular node. So we are actually using two nodes Kubernetes cluster, but in the picture we have three pods. But don't worry about it, I'm going to explain to you. So what it means, traffic. Traffic means, let's say you are on your browser, or let's say you execute a curl command. You go to your browser. So when I go to my browser, abc.com, I first actually hit the load balancer. In the public cloud, you might be using already application load balancer, right? There are like application and network load balancer, but I'm talking about layer 7 one. So HTTP, HTTPS. You get the load balancer. So load balancer basically first get the request and right here. So when you go to abc.com, load balancer is going to get your request and then it's gonna forward the traffic all the way to its backend depending on how actually you have designed your system. Here you might have ingress controller, right? You might have, in my previous video I talked about it in K3D videos, right? Here you might have, let's say Nginx or traffic or MetalLB, such kinds of reverse proxy, right? That actually forwards the traffic to SVC. So the SVC we are talking about is the Kubernetes service discovery, right? So this one is going to be receiving the request and it does the service discovery and going to send the request to its backend pod, and this pod is going to be, giving you the response back. So all the way it goes to load balancer, and this is what happens. abc.com, I get this page basically to get to see the home page. If you look at here, let's say this pod is actually running in node 1. So we are talking about node list. So basically, let's say the Minikube node. So we are talking about this one Minikube, right? Let's say this pod is running in this node, and then we have the second, let me select it. Then we have the second pod, which is running on the worker node, right? So it's node number 2. When we try to curl from our computer, let's say I'm on my local computer, right? We could not actually access the service. Is because in the node port type, the service was exposed to a particular node, right? So I'm talking about the nodes in the cluster, right? My computer is not part of the Kubernetes cluster because my computer is outside of the cluster. It's because they are running in Docker, right? From my computer, if I do a curl and then I say 127, or let's call it localhost, something like this, localhost, and if it is exposed to 8080, I would be able to access my service, the key-based service. But in the node port type, this is something we couldn't do, right? Without the port forwarding or without using the kube tunnel. But in here, you would be able to do so using load balancer type, meaning that you would be able to access your service from within the cluster and outside the cluster. If you have a public IP address and your friend actually goes to your browser, let's say you live in Europe, your friend lives in Mexico, he just goes to his browser, right, and types the IP address or the DNS, right, of your service, he would be able to access your service, right, unless you block his IP addresses, there is like geographical restrictions. Let's not focus on there. Then he would be able to access, meaning that your service is basically public. Anyone can access your service from anywhere. But in node port type, you can't really do it. You could actually access your service from node number 1. This is like, let's say, primary node, and here is the worker node. From here, you could do the curl, right? And if you have a browser, for example, you could also access it from there, right? And if you're on the same network, with the cluster IP, you could actually access it, right, within the cluster. With the load balancer, what happens? You make your application public, meaning that your application is exposed to a particular IP address where on a particular port, let's say port 80 in this case, so you can actually access it. So this is the load balancer type. And if you don't know what is load balancer basically does the distribution of your traffic. So if request number 1 comes in, does round robin. So he's gonna send it to here, the first request. If the second request comes in, he's gonna actually send it to the node number 2, right, in here. And then if the third one comes, he's gonna go here, fourth one goes here. So this is like one of the duties load balancer does apart from many other duties. So this is what is load balancer. Service is basically doing the service discovery. So it's going to basically trying to figure out which pod actually to talk to within the cluster to get the response back, right? So this is what service discovery does. So as we talked about, it does the filtering. We talked about label. We talked about select. In ingress controller, this is what exactly is going to be happening. So ingress controller is going to check which service actually has a match with the label, right? That's why we are also using label in here. Okay, so this is basically the concept, meaning that if someone goes to his browser, he can access your service. But in our case, in today's video, we do not have a public IP address. We have our local host. And when I show you the demo, this is what I'm going to be using. Since I don't have a public address, I can't unfortunately show it to you. But what I mean is that your service you can access from anywhere. So this is the background behind it. I hope you understand. If not, there is no problem. You can just follow me along. So when we talk about load balancer, basically it does the load balancing, right? It basically distributes traffic across your devices or across your server fleets, right? Okay, so that's that for the theory. So let's jump into the actual demo. So what I said is basically you can access your service from anywhere, right? And in here I will mark this one. This was a recap. If you remember my patch command that I used in my previous video, instead of node port, what I'm gonna do right now is basically the load balancer. So I'm gonna use load balancer. So if I'm using this, I would be able to see that type is actually changed to load balancer. And in Minikube, you see the IP address, cluster IP address would not change. It will remain as it is, right? This is the virtual IP that is actually created by kubeproxy. And if you have noticed, the IP address of my computer is basically 192.168 dot blah blah blah, and the kubeproxy actually creates on this network, right? As you can see it. So the external IP you can see is pending, and there is a reason why this is actually pending is because of this. So you have to do this minikube add-on and then list. Here you will see one service called ingress. This is right now disabled, and this service you actually need to enable. These add-ons basically are plugins. We don't need the DNS at this point, but we can use the ingress add-on. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say let me clear this, and I'm gonna say minikube add-on, and then you have to say enable if you want to enable, and if you want to disable, you just say disable, right, like that, just like that. So enable, and I want to actually enable ingress. So if you are doing this, it's going to enable the ingress. And this is the interesting part. You need to be very, very careful about this. After the add-on is enabled, you need to actually do a kube tunnel. Otherwise, if you go to a browser and you type like, let me open this one. If I go to localhost, let's say our service is exposed on this it's not gonna work. The Minikube add-ons list, let me grab and see the ingress is actually enabled. So you can see they use emoji, you can see. So it has been enabled. Then what I'm gonna show you right now is SBC, and if you look at here, it says pending. It is going to be pending as long as you do not run this command called tunnel. And after I do that, it's going to actually fetch the IP address. Since we do not have public IP address, therefore it's going to be localhost. And let's actually see it in action. So when I have actually done this, it actually started the tunnel, as you can see, right? And this is something, if you close this terminal, it's gonna kill the process, right? So meaning that you would not be able to access the service. Now if I go here, I would be able to access my, let me make it bigger. So you can see if I do one more time, it's actually, let me see. Okay, our service is basically here. Get, as we see, you can see the external IP is already given, which is our localhost basically at this point, because I do not have the public IP address. So now if I say Minikube node list and I say SSH, right, and I say curl localhost, and our service is exposed in here, and now we can actually access it. In node port type, this was not possible. We could actually basically curl to the IP address of this particular node, right, on a particular 30,000 something, right, node port. Now you can actually access it. So if I go to the second node and Minikube node list and Minikube SSH, and node is going to be Minikube, there is no auto completion for it. Okay, so I could just copy and paste, and if I'm doing this and I'm saying that localhost 8080 actually I'm able to access my service. So if you have noticed before, in cluster IP type, neither in node port type, we were not actually able to access the service, but in load balancer type we can actually access it. One thing I wanted to show you now, if I kill this, if you try one more time, you would not be actually able to do so. In Minikube, this is how it works, right? So if you want to access it, make sure that you need to actually start the tunnel. And the other important thing you also want to see is basically this. This is also good to know. If you are doing this, basically, let me do the list, right? Not this one, add-ons. Let me go to add-on, Minikube add-on list. If you actually enable, because we enable this, right? And if we disable right now, it's gonna fall back to the pending status again, right? So I'm talking about this one. It will actually fall back to pending. Look what has happened right now. Look at this, because we kill the tunnel. So remember this, if you kill the tunnel, this is what you're gonna see. You do not have to disable this service. You can see right away there is a change, right? So if you want to see the IP address of this is something you need to do. So if I'm doing it one more time and then I run this command called get SBC, I would be able to see this. Look at this. And if I'm trying to curl this, which is what already we are doing from our browser, we are actually able to access the service. So this is the difference. And if you have noticed already, we have got two ports, right? Because we have the 8 a.m., right? We have 8 a.m. This port is actually serving our request. And now if I do one more time, let's say I do this. This is what also good to know. You see, the next one is going to MSK. So this one was to this one, right? The request was sent, and the second one actually was served by this one. So you can see load balancer actually, distributing the traffic, right? So this is what load balancer does. So this is what I wanted to show you in today's video. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and hopefully we'll talk soon in the next video. And if you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please go ahead and press the subscribe button, and talk to you soon. And thank you very much. Bye bye.